Is Luke 21:25-33. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth there will be dismay among nations in their confusion over the roaring sea and surging waves. The planets and other heavenly bodies will be shaken, causing people to faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world. Then they will see the human one coming on a cloud with power and great splendor. Now, when these things begin to happen, stand up straight and raise your heads, because your redemption is near. Jesus told them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see these things happening, you know that God's kingdom is near. I assure you that this generation won't pass away until everything has happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will certainly not pass away. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So I don't know if any of you all know the difference between a farmer and a puppy dog. Some of you do, apparently. Well, for those of you who don't know, the difference is that the puppy will eventually grow up and stop whining. My mom's going to tell Dad about this tomorrow when she watches this on the internet, and then I'm going to get a phone call. So I'm going to start out by saying a couple of things. First of all, if you enjoy that joke, but you're not a farmer, I wouldn't tell it to farmers. But second of all, I was thinking, I heard this told about farmers, but after one of our gatherings for the men's breakfast, I thought this probably could apply to maybe shipyard and keyport employees. I know, sorry Daryl and Rod, I know heaven knows it certainly applies to ministers. We could probably fill in the blank in a number of ways on this, but I heard this on an NPR story the other day talking about farmers. I was really tickled by it. And I thought, but it does kind of speak to that experience of growing up on the farm. I mean, have any of you all ever lived in a place where you could walk into what passes for the local coffee shop? Because in small towns, you don't have coffee shops. You have a Hardee's or a McDonald's or whatever we decide is our local coffee shop. And that's where the old farmers gather to have coffee. What's that? The grain store. You have these places that they gather on the days they don't have to be out in the field early, and they get their coffee, and they like to sit around and, well, whine. Heaven wonders, is it ever going to rain? Are we going to get enough rain to sustain the crops? And then the next week, heaven wonders, is it ever going to stop raining because it's going to drown the crops? Will we get through to the fall? Will we not? In a lot of ways, that's kind of our pastime in farm towns and in farm families. And I know Howard's shaking his head, living in a farm town in Kansas. Yeah, you've heard it all and been a part of those conversations too. It certainly was the story of life growing up in the farming community in Missouri that I was raised on. But I was also struck by the ways that it formed who I am and how I came to understand my own faith. Because as I was reading the scriptures today, I was thinking, signs in the sky and on the land, and the way it's described in these kind of apocalyptic biblical terms that we hear in the scripture. Well, I'm not sure what exactly to tie those things to, but I sure knew how to watch for signs in the sky. When you live in the Midwest Plains, all you have to do is look to the west, and you're going to know whether it's going to rain that afternoon or not. If you live in Oklahoma, you look to the west, and you know if a tornadic cloud is coming or not. These are the kind of signs in the sky that you learn to watch for. But I also thought there's something to be spoken to about not just the signs, but learning to interpret and understand them. The fig tree that Jesus is talking about, I don't comparison to fig trees, but I can tell you what's going on when the seeds first begin to germinate in the farm fields, and you heave a bit of a sigh of relief. We didn't plant them too deep this year, or we didn't plant them too shallow and then we got too much rain, or we didn't do this, or we didn't do that. They're starting to grow and to sprout. And with soybeans, they'll get to the point where you can see the blooms. It doesn't last for too long, but you can see them there. You learn to interpret the signs, and you know spring has come and summer is riding in on its tail. Life is expanding and coming up from the ground, and we're on our way to harvest. Now, I could pick on my dad in a number of ways, but like I already told you, my mom's going to tell him everything I say. But he once did remark to me, he made a comment about the faith of being a farmer. There is something to be said about planting seeds in the ground in the spring and then knowing you've got a few months of trust and prayer and hope that by the end of the season they will have sprouted and grown, that there'll have been enough rain but not too much rain, there'll have been enough sun but not too much sun, so that when harvest time comes, there will be the abundance. I think of the different signs that I've seen. Once a year we had the most amazing crop of milo, grain sorghum plants. This looks like corn until it begins to head out the head of these milo seeds. And normally, your milo plants maybe get up to waist high or so on me, and that's where you start to see the head emerge. We had one year where the milo, as it looks like corn when it's smaller, and it kept growing, and it kept growing, and it kept growing, and it hadn't put on the head for the seeds. And I remember asking my dad one time, "Are you sure you planted milo and not corn in this field?" Because it kept going, and it came to the point where I could walk into that field of milo and I could disappear. And I'm 6'1". Milo doesn't grow this tall, but for whatever reasons this year we had a stand above my head and it put on these wonderful full heads of seed, and we're all looking at this and going, this is going to be one of the most amazing harvests we've ever had. Which of course means then when the farmers gathered together around coffee, they all went, we're going to have so much seed the price is going to drop, we won't make anything. But we had this amazing stand of Milo, and I thought, this is going to be incredible. Until the sign in the sky, a windstorm came. And you can imagine what happens to Milo plants that have grown way taller than they should be. They do not have the support to survive the winds like a cornstalk would. They also don't have the shucks and the protection around the seed. They're also not as hard as the field corn, You can't eat that stuff. It's a really solid ear. So a windstorm's not going to affect the corn. But the milo field went from this tall and beautiful stand to this long row of bent over stalks of milo. And we didn't lose all the seed on the ground, but you found yourself having to make the decision. Do you try to come in with your harvester and see if you can kind of cut under the stalks and maybe salvage some of it? Or just take the whole thing as a loss, chalk it up to your crop insurance, and move on? This is what hope looks like when you grow up on a farm. You never quite know what you're going to get. And you can go throughout the tides of the season from having nothing to having amazing to arriving at harvest with nothing again. And vice versa. This is a life of hope that I came to know growing up on a farm. These were the signs that I came to interpret: the coming of the storms, the rising of the crops, the blooming of the plants. And I wondered, what are the stories that we have learned and that we have known? We can hear Jesus speak of the fig tree, but how many of us grew up with fig trees? How many of us knew what figs were outside of a fig Newton? It took me a while to learn that one, so for a long time I didn't have the context for the signs. Or even the story, the words of hope that Gail shared from Jeremiah this morning during the lighting of the Advent candle. These sound hopeful, but any of you all who have read the book of Jeremiah know that's just a bright spot in the middle of a lot of not hopeful stuff. We're talking about the collapse of the kingdom, the arrival of the invaders, and the coming fall of Israel. And even those words of hope can be hard for us to really align with, to empathize with. We have not known the fear of invasion. We have not known the failures that we see, these biblical signs, if you will, that come up in our scriptures. So what are our signs that we have learned to interpret? What are the ways that we see hope in the world? I see hope when the plants begin to germinate. I see hope when the soybean plants, the pods begin to put on. I really see hope when you go into the field and you make sure there's actually something in the pods. I see hope when the corn has grown up and there's just enough sun that it isn't drying out and firing up too fast. And I see hope every time I watch a harvester pull up next to the grain truck, put out its auger, and start to unload. And those absolute not waves, but the spigot, if you will, the flowing grain, the golden amber that falls out of the combine into the truck. That's hope. I'm reminded time and again, my upbringing depended on this cycle of life to harvest through the winter of death and then circling back to life again. I had no idea how much that cycle was going to prepare me for the rhythms of life as a pastor in the church, how much it was going to equip me to understand the process of life to death through resurrection and into life again. But I realize I can tell you all about farm life and about how we love to complain about farm life and about how I love the signs of farm life all day long until I'm blue in the face. And it may be just as foreign to you as the fig tree is to me. So I wonder, as we embark upon this season of preparation for the coming of Christ, what are your stories of hope? What are your signs of life, of death, and of resurrection again? How have you come to know and embrace the love of God in your own way? I know we've all got our stories, but have we thought about them? Have we collected them? Have we cherished them? Advent is a time of preparing. It's our opportunity to think about that. I know it's busy. I know you all have got other things to do. We all have other things to do during December. But preparing for the coming of Christ is preparing ourselves to not only receive him, but embody him and be the coming of Christ for others as well. So you've heard my story of hope. Maybe one of these days you can share with me yours. Amen?